Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Another exciting show and definitely another exciting guest. Let me tell you where we're going with this show. We're going to go from Seattle to Dallas, but we're going to go deeper than that. We're gonna really travel to 50 states, and we're going to eat with 50 different people. That's crazy because the young lady on the show today, she traveled to Indiana and then offered me nothing to eat, and she was literally not that far from the studio. But let's go a little bit deeper than that. It makes me wonder why such a beautiful journey to 50 states to sit down and enjoy a meal with a stranger that you never met. And more importantly, what are some of the things that you talk about with somebody that you never met in 50 different states? Let's
Yeah.
go deeper.
Go ahead.
Let's go.
Um, well,
Let's
I came up with this
hold on.
idea.
Now, Sherry, we ain't
Okay.
done.
I'm
We
jumping
ain't,
in, huh?
we ain't done with your intro yet. We ain't done with your intro yet. Now, imagine this. Let's go deeper with her. I got to give her flowers now. A published author, a best-selling author, recovering from cancer, and then being a bandit, trying to find who you are in a world where identity matters. So let's welcome to the show, Miss Shari Leid to the show.
Thank you. Okay. I'm glad I got that whole intro in. That was good and that was worth waiting for.
So thank you so much. So let's start from the beginning. You was a bandit. So tell me who Shari actually is.
Well, I know who Sherry is now. I didn't know who Sherry was for a very long time. And as you mentioned, I was abandoned. I was orphaned in South Korea and I was found in a cardboard box without any identifying information. So I don't have my real birth date. And, you mentioned that I traveled across the US. Part of that travel I didn't realize was finding who I am and where it feels like home.
You know, I it's funny, but I can see the image of an infant being stranded there. And luckily, someone picked you up. Has anybody ever told you a little bit of the story on how you was found, who picked you up, how you got to the square one?
Yeah, there's very little records. I appreciate that you called me young lady, but this is back in 1969. So there weren't very many records. Even if there were, they probably would have been lost by this point. And what I realized, this cardboard box, I found out the story by looking at my records when I was in high school. So not a great time to find out that your birthday's not your own when you're already going through all your stuff you go through as a teenager. And what I realized though is this box that symbolically told me that I don't belong. When I traveled across the US to share these meals with these strangers, and they were all women, I was doing this travel on my own, that I had symbolically flipped that box over and made it a table where connection and belonging were found.
Man, let's go deeper. How did you manage to get a family to even get started on your journey? Because you went to high school, definitely college grad. I mean, who was because of the system, you usually go through multiple families before you decide to be with the right one. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I was adopted internationally, and I'm in the first, what they call the first wave of international adoptions. Korea was the first country to open up international adoptions following the Korean War because there are so many Amerasian and Eurasian babies from all the soldiers. And in Korea at that time, if you're a mixed race, they thought you were a second class citizen and you were basically not worthy of a full human existence. And so I was adopted by a couple here in America. While most, okay, you'll appreciate this. While most, Korean adoptees were adopted by rich white families, right? I was adopted by Japanese American families, a Japanese American couple. They were both born in the Seattle area. And there was a generation between us. So they were the age of my friend's grandparents, but they had been placed in internment camps during World War II. Yeah. So while my counterparts ended up in the suburbs in these wealthy families, I ended up with, and they were wonderful parents, but parents that had been interned during World War II.
When did the realization start to take place that you don't have a biological mom, biological dad? Take me to the mind of a young girl being part of a, like you said, a wave of discrimination because American soldiers were intermingling with Vietnamese soldiers and so forth. Now you're witnessing firsthand even your own country not having nothing to do with you. And now you're coming to America. What was all that like for you? And how did you process it?
Well, I was a baby, so I don't remember all of that, but I always knew I was adopted. Even though my parents were also Asian, we looked very different from one another. And at the time, I mean, now you see older parents all the time. People wouldn't blink an eye, but back then you didn't see parents that, have a newborn baby or not a newborn, but an infant or a toddler and they're about 50 years old. And so I always knew I was adopted and I always knew they were Japanese and I was Korean. And the thing about adopted kids is you always have to explain your existence and why you're in a family, especially if you don't look like your parents. You're explaining to strangers why you got into a family. So from a very young age, without realizing what I was doing, I was justifying why I had a family to random people, adults.
And you were creating a story at such a young age because imagine kids are curious. I mean, at the time, you probably didn't pay that no attention, but yeah, you're curious. What were some of the things that you remember that was almost the same question over and over, even as you got older?
Well, people always ask where you're from. I mean, people, and they're usually they mean well when they do that. And so I answer. I know they're not asking me if I'm from Seattle, right? So that's a question that gets asked a lot. And then now that when they find out my parents were Japanese American and I'm Korean, they're like, "How'd you guys get along?" And I'm like, "Well, those are those two countries. we didn't bring that into the house." But those are kind of the questions. People trying to wrap their minds around adoption and what's that like, and especially what's it like to not know your real birth date. That's a big one.
How is that? I was getting ready to ask that. Like, can they really figure out how old you are with today's technology?
Not, roughly, right? And, Asian don't raisin. So I like to say I
And look,
look younger than I am, but, not to the day. And so the date they gave me is December 16th, 9 days before Christmas. And when I found out that wasn't my birthday, I'm like, could you have picked at some time like in March or something? Why do you have me there competing with the savior, or with Christmas? So no, they can't tell exactly, but it's just because I was a baby, it's roughly around that time, I would imagine.
let me ask you a question. Such a beautiful story too that you're telling. Most adopted. Let me go back to your adopted parents. Were you the only child that they adopted? Did you grow up with siblings or anything like that?
No, I grew up as an only.
What about their family? Do you have cousins, relatives?
I do, but they were a lot older than me, the cousins were, so I never grew up close to them. In fact, me moving from Seattle to Dallas, this was really huge for me because my kids don't live with me. I'm close to my kids, but they're in their 20s. They're doing their own thing and they're doing well, but moving over here, I don't have an anchor. My parents are gone, they passed away. So no, I don't, other than my kids, I really don't have family.
Let's go a little bit deeper. And thank you for taking time to come and really share a story because it's going to get deep, guys. I
All
want you.
right.
I know.
I'm going to go there with you.
Okay, because I'm trying to put myself in your shoes.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking if I was in your shoes and got found in the box, I got new parents, you're in America and you're coming to America during, let's get real, people. We was dealing with a lot of racial shit. I know we're talking about the George Floyd, but that shit went on long before there was a George Floyd all over the world. Whether now that you're older, do you ever is there any way to determine with today's technology who your real parents might have been?
Other than DNA, and my DNA is even in the Lost Children's Bank in Seoul, South Korea right now. Somebody related to me would also have to submit a DNA sample for there to be a match. So all I know is that I'm Korean, and I'm Asian. But other than that, no, no, not unless somebody came forward to look for me and actually submitted a DNA sample to match.
What's been the toughest part of that transition of your life, coming over here new family. How has it been so far for you? Because
Well,
to me, it seems
yeah.
like, you're not really comfortable with the date that you was born. Usually when we're not comfortable with different things, there's a reason. There's a bigger picture. But how are you navigating everything now?
Now I one of as a keynote speaker, one of the my foundational phrases is the story you tell yourself changes everything about yourself. And so the story I tell myself now gives me confidence. I've had three different birth stories in my life. When you don't know your birth story, you make one up. I made one up as a child. I made one up in my 30s, and I have the one I carry now. But, because I was so young, I didn't know any different than now. And I don't know that the transition was as difficult, although, they say that I have a biological son and an adopted daughter. And when you have a child and you realize, man, that child within the first year, even if it's just the first year, that bond that happens and getting their needs answered all the time. And you think of a child who's been to different homes in that first year, that's not going to be the same child. And so I know that even though I don't know exactly what that may have done to me as a person, being put in different situations within my first year, I know it's definitely had to affect me in some way, as opposed to living with my birth family and never having that experience that first year.
How difficult was you to develop closeness? Because to me, your first child probably changed the trajectory of anything that might have cloud your thinking of past because it's a lot different. Were you missing nerd? How can I put this the right way to make sense? Because you were adopted, because you knew the situation. Were you longing for attention, or it just didn't bother you at all?
Well, I'm an only child, so yeah, I like the attention. But I think there was, I went through a divorce not too long ago, and I was married for 27 years, and I didn't realize until after this divorce that I'm codependent. I have to watch myself, and I didn't understand what codependency meant. I considered myself a very independent person, so I thought there's no way I'm codependent. I didn't realize the two can coexist. And meaning that, when you're, at least the way it manifests for me, when you're codependent, a lot of times you really want people to like you. So you do stuff, to make their lives look normal or feel good. It comes from probably a place of not wanting to be abandoned. So, that definitely is a piece of it.
What made you think that? Give me an example. What made that's curious. Let's go a little deeper. What made you think that you was codependent? Because talking to you right now and all the things that you've accomplished, I didn't like you said, I didn't know the two can coexist.
Yeah, I didn't either. And it's things like, not to throw anybody under the bus, but let's give an example. If somebody, for instance, may have a substance abuse issue, okay, and you curate your life around this substance abuse issue so that they look like they don't have that problem. And, you might do things like make sure that you both leave parties at a time where you're not staying late so this doesn't show up. Or at home, if the other person passes out or something, you just let them be and tiptoe around them. Things like that, where you basically are you don't realize you're supporting maybe a problem by making by
How long did this go on for you before you realized what was going on?
Are we talking about me?
Mm. Yeah.
Years, absolutely years, years, years. And I didn't realize that that's codependency.
When did the lights go off? When did the light go off?
I filed for divorce in 2023, December 2023, and I was finalized this year.
What did you change differently after finding out this? What did you do differently? You're a keynote speaker,
Mhm,
published writer, a mother of two.
mhm.
You had to have your shit, let's call it what it is, somewhat
Yeah.
in order. So was it hard for you to get back on track? And how did you get rid of that part of saying, you know, I don't need the codependency? How did you change that trajectory?
For me, it's just recognition. It's recognizing what that is. And I got married in my 20s. I was a checklist person. I went to high school, college, law school, got married, had 2 kids, got 2 dogs. I mean, the
You did
checklist
the
person.
Cinderella story.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I was so young when I got married, and you get into these patterns and you don't realize it. So it's not something that I think for me, because this showed up just in this relationship. It doesn't fortunately show up for me in other relationships I have with friends or, even with my children. So it was relationship specific and something the way we learned how to navigate around this relationship with one another. But for me, it's recognition, recognition.
Okay. I think we all need to realize that it is recognition. I
Mhm,
think the part about it is if you don't it the tricky part about it is if you recognize it and still don't do shit about it.
mhm.
That's what I call crazy. When you talk to people and you're like, well, I had this, I had this. I'm like, okay, well, why didn't you when you recognize it, why didn't you do something about it? I think it may be fear, but let's go deeper than this. You have two beautiful children. What made you decide to adopt?
It actually, I was practicing law at the time. My ex-husband was also practicing law. We were busy and he came up with the idea. We thought we knew we always wanted kids. He's like, "Hey, how about adoption?" So it wasn't an issue of not being able to have, a biological child. We thought, okay, takes about 2 years to adopt. Let's go down this path. If we have a baby before then, great. If not, we have this process. And so we adopted, and 2 weeks later found out I was pregnant. So we had 2 babies in 1 year.
Hey, I've heard that happen to people before. Let's go to a sadder note. You're dealing with the fallen fruit, which the word is cancer. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was 47 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it's really interesting to think about this now because one, we're talking, it's just ending the month of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And from Seattle, I had treatment at Fred Hutch Cancer Center. And after you're done with your treatment, after 5 years, they put you in what's known as a survivorship program where you see them once a year. So moving over here to Dallas, I was transferred to MD Anderson in Houston and into their survivorship program. I just had a visit earlier this week, in fact, my first visit there. And it surprises me how that hit me to change care, even though I'm not in active treatment, because you realize how much trust you've built up in a facility and your care team. And this is true, for any cancer patient. I was thinking, man, every time they move, if you have to move a lot, you always have to switch care. And being adopted and orphaned, not knowing my family history, they treat me as if I was high risk. Uh, and so which I appreciate, but I'm undergoing some of the diagnostic type tests right now just to rule out that anything has come back. But I'm 7 years cancer free. But it's something that you have to live with as far as that. I don't know if it's the fear anymore, but the thought in the back of your mind that, okay, this could happen again.
Yeah, and I was just getting ready to say that. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but based on your situation and no birth records or no former identification or anything, you would be considered high risk because they don't know what can happen.
And, even with tamoxifen, which is a common drug that they recommend that breast cancer patients take, I chose not to take it because they wanted me to take it for 10 years. And I asked them, does this drug work on Asian women with my genetics? And they couldn't tell me it does. They said it's been tested only on European women, and we have the results from European genetics, but not Asian, not Hispanic, not Black. And so I said, no, I'm not going to take a drug with that many side effects if you can't tell me it's going to work for me. And luckily, I was low risk because of the time they caught the cancer. That's another thing that we have to look at when we go into healthcare, being people of color.
I'm glad you brought that up because I tell people all the time. I even told my daughter, just a couple weeks ago before she went and had her surgery, she was a little timid about, and I say, look, you need to advocate for yourself. And I think I salute you for what you said, which I think the viewers need to listen to that or rewind it just because they say a drug works, you need to ask, where have the studies been done and have they been done on our culture people? And I'll show you an example. I had a cortisol injection and I had a stroke.
Ooh.
Yeah. And you know what he told me when I met with him? He
Hmm.
was like, you're one of a million that could, but I didn't think to ask that question, what you just asked. Where was this tested and was it tested on people of color? That's a key.
Yeah, it's
You said that. I'm glad you said that.
and yeah, medicines are genetic specific, you know, they're genetic specific. And currently there have been a lot of studies that have been cut this year, within the last year and a half or so on what they call diverse populations. And so a lot of these companies that have been trying to go out and research how these drugs work on different populations. Unfortunately, a bunch of those studies have been cut.
I'm glad that you're doing well. Well, I hope
Thank
you keep
you.
doing well, which I know you will. Now, let's go to something deeper.
Hmm.
You're in Dallas, and I love Dallas. I love my Cowboys.
Yeah.
I love my Cowboys. Let's go deeper. 50 states, 50 strangers, 50 meals. You came to Greencastle, and I didn't get offered fried chicken, watermelon, or coconut water.
I know. We are due to share a meal. You and I are due to share a meal.
So explain to me how all this came about and the connection with the book. Show me the book and how all that could connect together.
Here's the book. This actually was launched in New York City, uh, book launch party in February of this year, February 2025. It's called Table for 51. And I had never traveled the US before. I've traveled internationally, but not the US until this point. And because my parents were Japanese American and went through internment camps, I grew up traveling only on the West Coast with the belief that we weren't going to be welcome everywhere around the US. I wanted to rewrite that belief for myself and believe I was welcome everywhere, for one. For two, I did this travel in 2023. We had just come out of the pandemic. We as a country have put ourselves in physical bubbles, but not only that, we put ourselves in emotional and mental bubbles where we look at someone and say, okay, I can't talk to them because we look different, or our zip codes are different, our titles are different. And so I wanted to also demonstrate that that stuff doesn't matter, and we could at least sit down and share a meal with anyone and connect.
What was the first state that you visited and why?
New Mexico, Albuquerque. I'd never had been there before. And so I don't drive well in the snow, and I didn't want to drive a rental car in the snow. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go first to, because I started in January, I'm going to go to first to places that don't have snow. I didn't realize Albuquerque's the same elevation as Denver, Colorado.
Yes.
So it did snow a little bit when I went there, but Albuquerque was the first state I went to. And then after that, I got some nice warm states. I like Hawaii and Arizona, but I started in Albuquerque.
When you got to Albuquerque, this is a new venture. This is the start of the book, the start of of becoming you, your
Hmm.
application card. When you got to Albuquerque, who was the first person that you met? What was that like for you?
Her name was Nicole Bridges. She's a photographer over there. She was nervous. I was kind of nervous. Um, we sat down and we went to this place that was nearby. It kind of reminded me of Chelsea Market in a way. And we started talking. And the thing that she shared, her father was diagnosed, and I unfortunately can't remember what the disease is right now, but it's very debilitating. And it was in 2017. And she talked about how her life changed at that point because this disease can be passed on genetically. She didn't know if she had it or not. And it appears when you're older. And it typically starts manifesting when you're older. She has a 50% chance of having it. And so she decided rather than getting tested, she was going to live basically like if she had it. In other words, she was going to live as healthy as possible, enjoy life as much as possible, not waste a day. And it so happened 2017 was also the year I was diagnosed with breast cancer with the same resolve as she had. So here I am talking to this woman I had just met. We're talking about the same year that changed our lives due to a health concern. And having the same resolution of how to live our lives. And we both came from very different backgrounds, different ages, everything, but we were connecting right from the start.
It's so funny. I tell people all the time with my show, you'd be surprised how much every one of us are connected if we would just listen to the complete story.
Yes, yes. We all want the same things. We all want health. We want to do well financially. We want safety. We want our kids to thrive. I mean, we're human. We all want the same things.
How long do you stay in these particular locations, and how do you pick the locations that you go to?
So I found the women first. I found 27 on my own. For instance, Indiana, she was my web designer, had never met her in person. 27 places on my own. Then I reached out on social media with my project and said, hey, I have these places left. They sent me their former college roommates, their aunts, their cousins, their friends. And then I had 13 states left. And I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? My worst fear was to travel somewhere and somebody stand me up. So I thought, okay, if I get to women business owners, if they stand me up, at least I know where to find them. So I reached out on my own and I finally had my list. I had a big US map. I would just circle the places that these women lived. So my only criteria was that they could stay in communication with me.
My question here is why just women?
Because I was doing this on my own and I didn't want it to become anything. One is safety issue. Two, I didn't want people to assume I was like looking for a guy and I was married at the time. I didn't want it to be uncomfortable for my husband at the time. So that's why I just women.
Matter of fact, how did your husband take it? All of a sudden, you're going to 50 different states?
Yeah, I was flying back and forth a lot. You know, one thing, our marriage wasn't as well, clearly wasn't that great at the time. And what I was wondering is why, when I was flying home, was I getting anxiety? Why did and we had remodeled our house. I mean, it was so much into this house that was my dream home, to tell you the truth. And I couldn't understand why my dream home didn't feel like home. And that's when I realized it was the person or the couple living in the home that didn't feel like home.
I was about to say that, but I figured
Mhm.
I wasn't going to step on your parade.
Yeah, you knew what was going on there. Yeah,
Yeah, I already knew. So my next question: have you covered all 50 states?
I did. I did it in 8 months.
How did I don't know if I asked this question, but I'm gonna re-ask it. How long do you stay in each state again?
It depended. You know, some states I would be there for a few days. So I got a fair amount of media interest in my journey. And so if I had like a TV interview, that might have changed the time I was in the state. So some states, I think the longest I was in, maybe it was Denver, Colorado for 3 days. Sometimes, especially in the South where it was easy to drive to other states, I would be there for half a day. You know, I've had like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, I was, breakfast at one place and dinner at another.
Which 3 states and which 3 people outside of the lady here in Indiana, which I know she's number 1 on the list, was the most impactful that left you speechless to this day? You heard so many stories.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked that question, and usually they only give me a choice of one state. But I always say it's really hard for me to say because the whole project and experience wouldn't have been the same if one person was not in it. And what happened was, as I was traveling, instead of being individual people, it was almost as if I was listening and talking to one teacher, just the face and the voice changed. And it was almost as if the conversation that would say it would be the exact thing I needed to hear, going from one person to the next. An example is I had an experience where a woman had said something. I thought, man, I should have spoken up. I should have said something. I thought it was, um, she stereotyped. And I thought I should have spoken up, and I was kind of kicking myself for not doing that. And I met another woman the next day, and I was bringing this up to her that, man, I had this situation. And she said to me, and I guess it's a Buddhist saying that when the student's ready, the teacher will come. And that student, and she wasn't ready for you. And this woman was right. The other woman that I didn't speak up to, she and I have now become good friends. And now I could say what I wanted to say then, and it would come from a place of trust, and we could have these difficult conversations. If I had said something at that meal, she would have shut down and we wouldn't have communicated and had this beautiful friendship that we do now.
What do you think is the common thread? Because at the end of the day, 50 women,
Hmm.
what's the common thread with every one of them when you did your final analysis and when you went home?
Yeah. So, these were organic conversations. And I didn't realize this until I was writing the book that the one question I kept asking is, where feels like home? And that's when I realized this is what I had been searching for, a place that feels like home. And the common thread, the thing I learned is most people make choices because of who they love versus who they hate. And when I understood that, it made it a lot easier for me to have conversations with people who don't necessarily believe the way I do, don't necessarily vote the way I do, or things like that. Doesn't mean I agree with them, but I at least can understand now where they come from. And I could talk to them from a spirit of love, even though we might be totally opposites on what we agree, whether it's religious or political views, any of that. Most people, I think, do things because of those that they love as opposed to those they hate.
Do you think that women have a tendency to perform that task a lot better than men?
That's no, actually, honestly. I haven't sat down with 50 men, but now that I'm single, maybe I should. But I don't necessarily think so. But maybe women voice it differently. I mean, they talk more about their feelings and why they're doing things, and it's not as much of a fight, I guess. Yeah.
So what's next for you? What's the next
Yeah.
what's the next mission for you?
Well, I've created a retreat here in the Dallas area for women. It's a 3-day retreat and I call everything Flip the Box now. My whole brand now is Flip the Box. And I like to say, while most retreats take you away, this one brings you home. And the idea of this is chiseling away at the stories that aren't ours. Right? Because we live, our parents told us, the society has told us how to live. Like I said, I used to be a checklist person. What's my story? And that's what this retreat is about, is helping women find out who they are, what their story is, and stop living other people's stories.
I wish you'd do a retreat like that for guys, because I think we men suffer from that same mindset too. We may not admit it, but let's call it what it is. That we suffer from that
There's
same
so
stuff
much
too.
pressure on guys. I think there's so much pressure on guys. I even I got a new doctor over here and had to go through my first visit. They had this test where you like a squeeze test. I forgot what they call it, grip test to see how, how, and it wasn't a big deal to me. And this woman said, the nurse said, man, you used to see when guys come in here, you would think that they were competing against somebody with that grip test, just to get that number. But I think that's what society puts so much pressure on men to, be the best, be on top, to whatever a man is supposed to be. So I agree with you. I think a lot of men don't know what their own story is because they're living up to these expectations that they believe that they have to live up to be a man.
You're 100% right on that. All right, before we wrap up, you got a great podcast that's taking the social media by storm. What's the name of the podcast? And tell me about it. What's it about?
It's called An Imperfectly Perfect Life with me, Shari Leid. And I started this when I was going through my divorce because I thought, okay, I'm going to help other women here and guys going through this, and I got to do it in real time. And I start things. When I have an idea, I always say start ugly because it's so much easier to make ugly pretty than perfect better. So I started ugly with it, and it wasn't set up like your great podcast when I started. It sounded like I was stuck in some room, but it's grown, and it's evolved over time as I have. So it started about this change and reinvention. And how do you do this? How do you move to a new city? How do you create community in a new place? And now it's evolving towards business and entrepreneurship and building a business in a new city.
Why'd you pick Dallas?
I narrowed it down to 4 cities. My criteria was the cost to buy a home had to be much less than Seattle. It had to be by a good airport. It had to have a good professional speaking community. And there had to be single successful men in their 50s and 60s that were dateable.
Okay, so tell me the 4 cities.
Okay, I had
You can't
Vegas.
lie too. You can't lie too. You know that.
Yeah, I had Vegas, Scottsdale, Denver, and Dallas. I said I visited Vegas. It felt too Vegas for me, even, the suburbs. So I couldn't do that. Scottsdale, I found out one, the cost of buying a home where I would want to in Scottsdale wasn't that much less than Seattle. And I found out the men my age are dating 30-year-olds, and I don't have time for that. Then Denver, I always have fun visiting Denver. My college roommate lives there, but it's very outdoorsy. I'm not outdoorsy. So I thought, man, that would be terrible if every time I went on a first date, if I'd have to hike. So Denver was out. Then I visited Dallas. I spent 30 hours here. I bought a home. It felt like the LA of the South.
Okay, next time you go to Indianapolis, go to Indianapolis, the crossroads of America, the best airport. Everybody that comes here goes, you guys got the best airport, hotels. The Super Bowl's been here, well, we would have had it twice. The Indiana Pacers, they're 500. I should be the spokesperson for this city.
You should have, man. I should have talked to you. I should have talked to you a few months ago.
Oh, don't get me wrong, because if I had to go anywhere, it would be Dallas. But Indianapolis is definitely should have been on your bucket list. It's a great place, affordable housing. You get a lot for your money. Great school system, great support system all around. Politically, like I said, great diverse communities around here. It is a beautiful city. I lived in other cities, and you know what they say: you always come back to where you're comfortable.
Yeah,
You always
yeah.
come back to where you're comfortable.
Well, this is my 10-year plan here. I gave myself, about 10 years. That might change, but maybe in 10 years, I'll be checking out Indianapolis, looking for the places where 60 and 70-year-old men are out.
We're at the cigar bar. We're
There you go.
relaxing. That's what we do. We sit back and relax. So what would you tell somebody who's been through as much as you've been through and still smelling like roses, still making an impact with the community? What would you tell somebody that keeps you going?
Every day I wake up and I say to myself, today is going to be easy. And that, it doesn't matter what the day throws me. And I think, okay, I had two tires that needed to be fixed last week. Today's going to be easy. And it was, it wasn't a big deal.
I wish everybody thought like that. How can the viewers reach out to you, support you, and follow you on your podcast? And more importantly, get that best-selling book that you got.
Yeah. So, my name's here. It's Shari Leid, Shari. Last name is Leid, Leid. That's probably the easiest way. Just Google and More Than You Want to Know will pop up. But that's an easier way than looking at my website because my website is a long name and imperfectlyperfectlife.com.
You guys make sure you subscribe, like, share, and follow. Click that button because you never know whose life you may change and maybe impact yourself. Shari, thank you so much for taking time out to come on the show. Love to have you come back, learn more about this retreat that you're doing. You guys make sure you go to that retreat too, because anything that can elevate your mind, body, and spirit, you need to be a part of because that can also help you elevate your own well-being and help make a difference in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said so many times, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.